Okay, so we are going to do a full story video. A full story video is usually when I take a bunch of videos that tell, one overarching story and combine them together into one big video. Now, I kind of want to do the prelude for Age of Apocalypse. And let me explain why. Because when it came to Age of Apocalypse, Marvel gave us X-Men Alpha, and that was the starting point for the entire event. But once you had Marvel being able to wrap up the entire event, they gave us a bunch of other issues that took place before X-Men Alpha. So technically, they were preludes to kind of get a better idea what the world was like before you dived into X-Men Alpha when it came to X-Men Age of Apocalypse. So I'm going to take all those different videos and combine them together into one big video. And so I do hope you enjoy today's comic book video. Okay, so we are finally going to dive into Age of Apocalypse. This is truly amazing. Guys, we have a massive storyline to cover, and don't worry, we're going to hit every single point of Age of Apocalypse. Now, when it comes to this massive crossover, you have to remember that this is coming out of Legion Quest. And just in case we do have somebody getting into our coverage over the X-Men and they have no idea where this event came from, I'm telling you right now, it came from Legion Quest. And let me explain, because that storyline was also amazing, but it was the foundation for Age of Apocalypse. Because to Legion, he believed that thanks to Magneto just being around and always fighting against Charles Xavier, that Charles Xavier was never truly able to finish his lifelong goal, which is have mutants and humans live together in harmony. And so for Legion, he said, if I go back in time, kill off Magneto, then most likely I would bring in a brand new world, a better world where mutants and humans can live together in harmony. The problem was that for Legion, when he went back in time, he didn't kill off Magneto. He killed off Charles Xavier on accident. And so with the death of Charles Xavier, the old timeline we knew and loved went away, and a brand new timeline came into the picture, Age of Apocalypse. Now, when it came to Marvel, when they had kicked off Age of Apocalypse, they gave us X-Men Alpha. And X-Men Alpha was kind of like a way to see what this brand new world is going to be like, with Apocalypse being able to rule over North America. But shortly after we got X-Men Alpha, we then got X-Men Chronicles. And really, X-Men Chronicles lead into X-Men Alpha to kind of show us the early days of this brand new timeline before you had Apocalypse being able to rule over North America. But it also kind of get the idea of how Magneto had formed his own X-Men. And that right there is really important, because even though there's no Charles Xavier, Magneto is still around. And Magneto is a tad bit different than he is in his old timeline. But at the same time, he does form his own X-Men team as a way to carry on Charles Xavier's dream, or he tried to at least. Because in the opening pages of X-Men Chronicles #1 is really more of the book telling us hey, Magneto tried at first. He went out there to say, listen, I know you humans fear us, hate us, but let me educate you guys about us so that we have the ability to live together in harmony. Mutants and humans working together. But the problem was that fear and hatred towards the mutant race just overruled everything that Magneto was trying to build up. And so sooner or later, he realized that there's going to be dark times coming for the mutant race. But he also realized that it might not be possible for mutants and humans to live together in harmony. And so he went over to Wandagore Mountain. And what he did was he built a school inside the mountains. He said, you know what? I'm going to stay away. But also, I'm going to take in a few mutants to help teach them how to use their powers, how to control their powers. And this leads into the X-Men. And so it's kind of cool because we now get our first look at Magneto's X-Men team. You have Quicksilver, you have Storm, Iceman, Jean Grey, Colossus, and the Scarlet Witch. This is the X-Men that Magneto had built off of Charles Xavier's dream. Now, we currently see them in the Killing Zone, and I kind of love that name. Like, hey, you know what? Let's not call it the Danger Room. Let's call it the Killing Zone. But the Killing Zone is just like the Danger Room, a training room for the X-Men. And for Magneto, he wants to make sure that his X-Men are truly ready to be out there in the field fighting against the forces of Apocalypse. Because for Magneto, he knows that sooner or later, Apocalypse is gonna make a move, and other enemies are also gonna make moves as well. He needs to get the X-Men ready for battles to come down the road. But right after you have the X-Men finish their training session, they are then confronted by their latest team member, and that would be Logan. Now, in this reality, Logan is not Wolverine. In this reality, he is Weapon X. That is his code name. And so for Logan, when he first walks out, he kind of shows us that he's going to be roughed around the edges. And honestly, it was the same thing for him in the old Marvel timeline as well, when he had first joined the X-Men, being roughed around the edges. And so in this timeline, it's the same thing. He comes into their training session and he goes berserk already. Now, here's the thing. When he goes berserk, he's going all over the place, and he almost killed Iceman in the middle of that training session. But luckily, you had Quicksilver there to grab Bobby and get him the heck away from Logan. Now, after doing that, you then had Magneto tell Jean Grey to use her powers to ease the mind of Logan, to bring him out of his berserker mode. The problem is that I feel like Jean Grey is not as powerful as she could have been if she had Charles Xavier in her corner. Now, this is not me saying like Magneto is a bad teacher or something. It's more of like Magneto does not truly understand how the powers of a telepath works. He only knows parts of how it works. And if she had Charles in her corner, she would have had a better chance learning how to use her powers to her full potential already. But either way, it's her being able to calm the mind down of Logan. But it took a lot of energy out of her because how crazy his mind truly is. Now, you do have Magneto walk away. And the reason why, because he has another meeting. Because they're getting another team member to join the X-Men. But now we have to jump over to New York. And when we do, we see this massive ship just float right over New York. Now remember, in the old Marvel timeline, this ship was actually used by the Celestials to collect data on Earth. But at one point in time, you had Apocalypse being able to take over the AI system on the ship and use it for his own. And so right now, that same ship is floating right over New York City. And you have Kendra say, listen, I am the herald of Apocalypse, and humans, you have been warned. The day of the fit and the strong has arrived. To basically say like, hey, you humans have shown us that you are not as strong as the mutants. And so now it's time to go. This begins the whole idea of Apocalypse ruling over North America, starting off with New York. But now we have to jump back over to Magneto. Now, when we do, it's really more of Magneto being able to meet his newest member to his X-Men team, and that would be Rogue. Now, in this reality, Rogue is still technically the adoptive daughter for Mystique, but the only difference is that in this reality, you don't have Rogue being somebody who had absorbed the powers of Carol Danvers like she did in the original timeline. In this timeline, she had absorbed the powers of Polaris. So we're kind of left to wonder, is Polaris still around in this reality? If she is, does she have any kind of power left after Rogue had basically absorbed some of her powers? And so for Rogue, it's her trying to fit in this whole brand new idea of being part of the X-Men team. And matter of fact, you have Iceman walk into the room, and Iceman is automatically attracted to Rogue and he wants to touch her. But the problem is Rogue powers are still active. So she's scared of the idea of hurting Bobby. But it's Magneto saying, I heard of Polaris. I know her powers are very similar to mine. And so I now have the ability to show you things. Now, this also kind of builds the idea of the possibility of Rogue and Magneto possibly getting together, being that one person who can actually touch her, kiss her, and be with her. And now we have to be introduced to the Horsemen of Apocalypse as they head over to the Cape Citadel. And the reason why, because their main goal is to possibly steal a bunch of nuclear missiles for Apocalypse to use. Now, when it comes to his horsemen, you have Gideon, Kandra, War, Death, and their leader is Sabretooth. But now we jump back over to the Scarlet Witch and also Rogue. Now, it's really more of the Scarlet Witch being able to show Rogue around the base of the X-Men, but it also kind of tell Rogue like why Magneto is doing all of this for. The whole idea of the X-Men, the whole idea of trying his best to hopefully see a world where humans and mutants are able to live together in harmony. The whole idea of mutants being able to learn how to use their powers out in the world for the betterment of good is all because of Charles Xavier. But also for Magneto, he kind of feared that one day a very evil mutant, Apocalypse, would be able to bring in a war that would take place all over the world and could bring the end to the entire world. And so he had been waiting for the right time for his X-Men to be out in the field to fight against the forces of Apocalypse. Now, you do have Magneto confirm everything the Scarlet Witch is saying to Rogue, but then you have Magneto being confronted by Quicksilver saying, Father, it's Apocalypse. It's his horsemen. They have attacked a nuclear facility. And so when we jump back over to that military base, the only thing we're seeing right now is the Horsemen of Apocalypse being able to just run through all the different soldiers that were placed at this military base. Their assignment was to keep the nuclear missiles from falling into the wrong hands. And they believe with their weapons, they should be able to handle a few mutants. But now they're realizing they can't. And most likely they are going to die. And so for Magneto, he's watching all of this on his satellite feed, and he realized that it's time for his X-Men to go into action. It's time for the X-Men to try their best to handle their business, to hopefully stop the Horsemen of Apocalypse from getting their hands on those nuclear missiles. And so while you have Magneto getting the X-Men ready to leave, he tells Scarlet Witch and also Rogue to stay behind. Now, the reason why, because Rogue is just a new person on the team. She's not really ready to be out in the field just yet. Now, when it comes to Scarlet Witch, somebody got to stay behind with the rest of the students who are currently there at Magneto's school. And so with those two staying behind, the rest of the X-Men leave to hopefully defeat, well, the Horsemen of Apocalypse. But while they're leaving, there's somebody who's getting ready to attack the base of the X-Men, and he is known as Nemesis. But 2 hours later, you then have the X-Men arrive at the Citadel to hopefully fight against the Horsemen of Apocalypse and defeat them. But the problem is that as soon as they arrive, they're automatically attacked and blown out of the sky. And so now it's time for the X-Men to get to work to fight against the Horsemen of Apocalypse. But getting back over to the school of Magneto, we're seeing Nemesis go out of his way to attack the school. But here's the thing, because remember, for Apocalypse, it's all about survival of the fittest. The strong can live, the weak must die, the strong can lead, the weak must follow. And so for Nemesis here, he had decided that every single mutant at his school is not strong enough or have the right to live because they are weak. And so you have him go out of his way to attack the school. Now for Scarlet Witch, her main goal is to protect the students, but you have her wondering, where in the world is Rogue? Well, Rogue is battling against Nemesis at this exact moment, and for him, he got hurt by Rogue, and he hates the idea that she was able to touch him but actually hurt him as well. Now, I kind of want to jump back over to the Horsemen of Apocalypse. And here's the reason why, because they were able to get their hands on the nuclear missiles. Now, for Sabretooth being their leader, he was kind of told like, hey, your goal is to get your hands on the missiles. We are only going to hold on to them and kind of use them to kind of scare other people around us who might try to attack us. But our goal is to not really use the missiles, or really that what he believed. But the rest of the Horsemen, they were told by Apocalypse, no, get your hands on those nuclear missiles and get ready to use them against different targets across the world. And so for Sabretooth, he's kind of like, wait a second, I did not sign up for this. But here's the thing, survival of the fittest. And so with them now kind of being scared to use the missile, they're saying, hey, you have now been labeled weak. And so now you have to die. Now, luckily for Sabretooth, the X-Men arrived. And so he was able to say, you need my help when it comes to fighting against the X-Men. There is no way that the four of y'all can handle Magneto's X-Men team. And so for the Horsemen of Apocalypse, they agreed to allow him to live just for this battle. But once the battle ends, most likely they're going to kill him off. And so, of course, the first battle would be Wolverine fighting against Sabretooth. Now, when it comes to this battle, it seems like the first time that these two characters had officially met. But on top of that, we do learn that for Apocalypse, he was going to originally recruit Wolverine, or Weapon X, but he did not. Instead, he has selected Sabretooth. But either way, you do have the two characters begin their battle here at the Citadel. And so the next few pages are really more of us kind of seeing the different types of matchups between the X-Men and also the Horsemen of Apocalypse. So we do see Jean Grey go up against Kendra. You also have Magneto go up against Gideon. Now for Gideon, he has the ability to kind of mimic Magneto's power and use it against Magneto. So it's kind of a cool matchup there between those two characters. And you have Iceman, Colossus, and Storm being able to go ahead and take care of war. Like literally in one page, you have the three characters gang up on that one member of the Horsemen of Apocalypse and take that person out in a matter of seconds. But getting back over to the battle between Wolverine and also Sabretooth, that battle is really short-lived because you do have Wolverine being the one to win against Sabretooth. Sorry, Weapon X being the one to defeat Sabretooth. It's kind of hard to remember that in this reality, it's not Wolverine, it's Weapon X. Guys, don't worry. I'll make sure in future videos I get it down correctly. But yes, Weapon X does win the battle against Sabretooth. And really, you have Magneto also being able to overpower Gideon as well by just when it comes to Gideon, he has to absorb the power someone is using and then use that power against them. But Magneto is overloading Gideon to the point where he explodes. And so there goes Gideon. In this reality, he's dead just like that. When Gideon had exploded, it did cause a huge explosion in the actual building. So you do have the rest of the X-Men kind of wondering in the possibility, did Magneto survive that explosion? Now, with Apocalypse appearing, he said, hey, you know what? Magneto is most likely dead. But on top of that, Sabretooth, you have failed me, so you got to stay here. The rest of the Horsemen, go ahead and come with me. Now, for Apocalypse, he also knows that he cannot recruit any member of the X-Men because they don't really stay with the idea of what he stands for. So he says, hey, you know what? Y'all can stay here. I know there's no point in trying to recruit y'all, but the Horsemen, we gotta go. Sabretooth, stay here. You're now technically labeled as a weakling. So right after you have Apocalypse leave with his Horsemen, you then have Magneto appear. And for Magneto, he's saying, listen, I survived the explosion, but also I'm proud of you guys because you guys were able to take down the Horsemen of Apocalypse. But don't think that this will be our last battle against Apocalypse in his madness, because honestly, there's going to be many battles down the road that we are going to have to face together as a unit. Now, the ending of the story is truly messed up because when you do have Magneto's X-Men being able to get back to the school, they kind of find out that the school has been completely wrecked by Nemesis, but also The Scarlet Witch has been killed off by Nemesis. Really, she does survive just long enough to say goodbye to Rogue and the X-Men and her father as well. So this is the ending for just X-Men Chronicles #1. It's kind of like, man, this is only the beginning of Age of Apocalypse. But with that being okay, so it's time for us to go ahead and get back into our coverage over the X-Men and technically continue our coverage over the Age of Apocalypse storyline. Now, here's the thing, because technically at this moment, we're still covering the preludes that lead into the X-Men Age of Apocalypse storyline properly. And let me explain, because when it came to Marvel Comics, in the early days of them working on this event, they gave us X-Men Alpha #1. Now, X-Men Alpha #1 was supposed to be the starting off point for their brand new event that led into other books we used to kind of explore the brand new world that Marvel had created with this event. But the problem was that at the tail end of their event, they began to give us all these different prelude books that led into X-Men Alpha #1. That kind of shows the world is like when it came to Apocalypse in the early days of trying to take over North America. Now, just in case we do have anybody who's just joining us when it comes to our coverage over Age of Apocalypse, let me explain where this event came from. So we got to jump back over to Legion Quest. Now, when it comes to Legion Quest, it's the whole idea of you had Legion go back in time to kill off Magneto. And the reason why, because he believed that if Magneto was not around, then Charles Xavier should have been able to achieve his goal, where mutants and humans are able to live together in harmony. The problem was that when you had Legion go back in time to kill off Magneto, he killed off Charles Xavier, which then created a brand new timeline where you now have Apocalypse trying his best to take over North America by this point in the timeline. But with the death of Charles Xavier, it truly did affect a lot of different characters in different types of ways. Like, for example, Cyclops and also Havoc. Now, in the original main Marvel universe, Cyclops was the first X-Men that Charles Xavier had recruited. But the thing is, in this reality, it didn't go that way. Instead, you had Cyclops and also Havoc be adopted by Mr. Sinister. But on top of that, Mr. Sinister is the right-hand man for Apocalypse. So for our two heroes, or usually heroes, they're now on the side of evil. They now work for Apocalypse, but also Mr. Sinister. So this storyline is really more focusing on them being on the side of evil, but also being confronted by their real father. And so getting into the opening pages of the storyline, we do pick up 5 years in the past. Now, technically, this was the moment where you had Apocalypse begin his conquest to take over North America. The whole idea of survival of the fittest. The strong may live, the weak may die, the strong may lead, the weak must follow. With all that being said, when it comes to Apocalypse, he said, you know what? The first place I am going to attack is Manhattan and make it my capital of my brand new territory. And so that took place 5 years ago in the past. But also 5 years ago in the past, you had this random spacecraft appear in the middle of Manhattan. Now, as soon as it did arrive in the middle of Manhattan, you then had the forces of Apocalypse go out of their way to shoot that thing out of the sky. Now, after doing that, you then had the salvage team moving to figure out what's actually inside the spaceship. And once they do open it up, they say, hey, you know what? We should go ahead and call this one in because this is very interesting. Now, before we were able to learn what was inside that spaceship, we jump over to Havoc and also Cyclops going through a training session. Now, the whole point of this session is to not use their powers to take down their enemies. The problem is that Havoc is struggling, and you have Scott go out of his way to tell his brother what to do to help them win this battle. But unfortunately, Havoc does not want to listen to Scott at all. And the reason why, because in this reality, Alex hates Scott with a flaming passion because a lot of people show more love towards Scott than they do towards Alex. But either way, when it comes to Alex, with him losing his battle, he has no choice but to go ahead and use his powers. Now, like I said earlier, when it came to this brand new reality, Scott and Alex, they were adopted by Mr. Sinister. So he was the one watching over their training session. Now, you do have Sinister be confronted by Hank McCoy. Now, Hank McCoy works for Sinister, but also in this reality, he becomes Dark Beast. Technically, we're going to see Dark Beast here in a moment, but 5 years ago, he looked pretty normal. But it is him saying like, hey, Sinister, we found something very important inside that spaceship that you might want to see. And so now we jump forward 5 years. 5 years later, the present day, and we pick up with, well, Christopher Summers, the father to Scott and Alex Summers. But unfortunately right now, he's a prisoner of Sinister, but also being used right now for an experiment by Dark Beast, Hank McCoy. Now, here's the thing, because Hank McCoy is truly messed up. The man will do anything for the name of science. And right now it's him saying, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and run a few more tests on you. But you didn't have Christopher being able to break out of his binds to get away. Now, here's the thing, because it does kind of seem like Christopher does have super strength. But the question is right now, how? How in the world did he receive this super strength? Because in the old timeline, he was just a regular human. But either way, he was able to break out of the base that belonged to Sinister. But right after he was able to escape, he realized that he's in Manhattan. Now, for Corsair or Christopher Summers, he kind of realized like, yes, this is Manhattan, but he does not recognize it at all because one, it has been completely wrecked by the forces of Apocalypse, but also because the man has been gone for a very long time. But either way, you didn't have Christopher be confronted by Robbie Robertson, who's very important over in Spider-Man comics, works at the Daily Bugle. But apparently the man is trying his best to keep the humans informed about what's happening around the world, things that Apocalypse does not tell the humans at all when it comes to the world. But also you have Christopher wonder like, hey, where are my boys, Scott and Alex Summers? Now, here's the thing. They are well known in the world in Apocalypse territory. And so for Robbie, he said, wait, you're Christopher Summers, the supposed father to Alex and Scott Summers? Oh man, you know what? Let me tell you where your boys are at right now. And the thing is, you might not like going to hear about your boys. But now we have to jump over to Sinister. Now, when we do, it's really more a Sinister telling us that he now knows that Corsair had escaped. Now, here's the thing, because for Scott and Alex, they had no idea that their biological father was being kept in the lab of Dark Beast. In matter of fact, it's not even Sinister right now telling the boys about their father. Instead, it's him saying like, hey, a prisoner had escaped, and now we have to go out of our way to get that prisoner back here before bad things happen to that prisoner. And so it's Sinister saying, I don't want Scott and Alex involved in this mission at all. I want the rest of you guys, my people, to go out of their way to find this missing prisoner. So Northstar and Aurora, the Bedlam brothers, Implate and the Monet girls, you guys will go out of your way to find our missing prisoner. Alex and Scott, you have to stay behind for the time being. Now for Scott, he can't believe that he's not being involved in this mission because usually he would be. And also he's team leader. So what in the world is going on here? But now we have to jump over to Angel. Now, when it comes to Angel, in this reality, the dude has his own nightclub. Now, his nightclub, Heaven, is a neutral zone. So humans and mutants are allowed to go there without worrying about being attacked by the other side. Now, with that being said, when it comes to Angel, he's also somebody who works for both sides. He's able to get you intel on the other side or about the other side for the right price. But for right now, it's just Angel saying, hey, Alex, Havoc, and also the Bedlam brothers, welcome to Heaven. Matter of fact, the drink's on the house. Go ahead and relax. Now for Havoc, he's still very bothered about the idea of his brother being the team leader, but also kind of like Sinister showing more love towards Scott than Alex. But picking up with Sinister's hunting team, they're still trying their best to find Christopher Summers, but they do find Robbie Robertson. Now, he is quote unquote dead, but not really. And the reason why I'm saying that because they do find him and say, hey, he's dead, but his body is moving. And you do have these evil mutants go out of their way to kill off Robbie, but there is a good reason why his body moved, even though he was quote unquote dead. But for these mutants, they're like, hey, you know what? Our target, Christopher Summers, is still nearby. Let's go ahead and try our best to find him and bring him in. And honestly, it didn't take them that long to find him. And matter of fact, it's kind of cool because you do have all these different mutants try their best to attack Christopher Summers. But the problem is, he knows how to handle himself. He knows how to defend himself. And so he was able to take them all down very easily. But after doing that, we kind of learned that he was afraid of the idea of losing control. Now, there is a good reason why he felt that type of way. But again, it will not be explained to us until the very end of this storyline. Now, it does not take that long for Scott to find out what happened to the hunting team. And so his main goal now is to get involved and to figure out who in the world is this prisoner, but to also bring him back in. But he also has Scott go out of his way to get his brother Alex involved. So now the two of them will go out of their way to hunt down their own father, even though they have no idea they really are hunting down their biological father. And really, it does not take Scott and Alex that long to find their missing team members. Now, they do find Implay. He is officially dead. He was killed off by Christopher Summers. But the rest of the team, they're still alive, but they're knocked out or just completely frozen in fear because what happened to their fellow team members. But for Scott and Alex, they have to continue on to find, well, their father. And you do have Scott and Alex head over to a cemetery and they do find their missing person, their missing prisoner. But they kind of find out that missing prisoner is their father, their biological father, Christopher Summers. Now for Christopher, he does recognize the boys automatically. He's all like, guys, it's me, it's your father. But for Scott and Alex, they're kind of like, dude, you've been gone for many years. Where in the world have you been? And so this kind of leads into the origin of Christopher in this reality. And really, it's more the idea of us seeing a flashback where it's the Summer family on their airplane just minding their business flying around. But then out of nowhere, their plane was attacked by a Shi'ar Empire spaceship. Now for Christopher, he made sure his boys got away by giving them a parachute and pushing them out of the plane to hopefully survive. But him and Catherine, his wife, they were captured. Now they were tortured over time. Catherine died, but Christopher lived on. Now, once you had Christopher being able to get put into a cell in the Shi'ar Empire prison, he met the other members of the Starjammers, and they were able to break out and be free. But the question is right now, what happened after that led to him coming back to Earth? But you didn't have our heroes back in the present day be attacked by a group of scavengers. Now, these scavengers are just people who are technically hungry. They're going to kill off other people as a way to get food. But either way, you do have our heroes go out of their way to defeat these scavengers. But after doing that, you have Scott realize that a bad storm is coming in very soon. They need to find shelter. And luckily for them, there's a building nearby. But here's the thing. For Scott and Alex, they want to continue to have a conversation with Christopher to kind of figure out, it really is their father who came back into their lives. Now, for Alex, he already believes that Christopher is their father. But for Scott, he's still on guard because he's afraid of getting hurt, but also it could be a trick once again. But now we have to jump over to, well, Sinister and Dark Beast. Now, for these two characters, they're talking about Jean Grey, but honestly, she's not important for this storyline, but it's really more Dark Beast saying like, hey, what's going to happen when Scott and Alex find out that you had their father the entire time for the last 5 years in my lab? Like, they're going to be very upset with you. And the thing is, that is a possibility. And really, when we do jump back over to Scott, Alex, and also Christopher, it's them still trying to figure out like, hey, is this really their father? Like, Alex does agree, it is their father. But for Scott, he's on guard. But it's Christopher saying like, that's my son though. He's just like me. Always on guard, always trying his best to protect himself, but to also protect other people. Where Alex is kind of like his mother. Now you do have Scott walk around the building to make sure that the entire building is secured. Except for Scott Summers, when he's walking around the building, he comes to find out that there are a bunch of dead people in this building. But the question is right now, like, what killed them off? Now, for Scott Summers, he does find Misty Knight. And Misty Knight is tied up. Now, she's not really going out of her way to explain what exactly went down here. But you do have Scott realize that Misty Knight should not be alone because, hey, look around. There's a bunch of dead bodies. Now, right after you have our two characters walk away, one of those dead bodies comes to life, and that would be Colleen Wing. But either way, it's now telling us that there's something going on in this particular building, and this kind of ties into Christopher Summers. And you'll see what I mean as we go through the rest of the storyline. Because once you have Scott and Misty Knight being able to regroup with Christopher and also Alex, you didn't have our heroes be surrounded by all the different dead people in that building. Now, yes, they were dead, but not technically all the way. And let me explain why. Because they have been taken over by the Brood. Now, the Brood is an alien race, and their main goal is to conquer, well, the universe, conquer different planets in the universe. But how they do it is completely nasty. Let me explain. So what they do is that they plant an egg inside of you. Once that egg hatch, you are slowly being turned into a Brood to add to their numbers. So all these dead people, they had eggs inside of them. And of course, they all begun to turn into, well, Broods. Now, you do have our heroes trying their best to fight against the army of Broods. Unfortunately, Misty Knight, she dies. But for Scott, Alex, and Christopher, they do run outside, but unfortunately, they are surrounded by more members of the Brood. But luckily, at the very last second, they are saved by Mr. Sinister. Now, for Sinister, his goal is to not attack the Brood inside the building. No, his goal is to attack Christopher. And the reason why, because Christopher Summers has also been affected by the Brood. That what happened right after he was able to free himself from the Shi'ar Empire. He got captured by the Brood and infected by them. And so for Sinister, for the last 5 years, he had been trying his best to supposedly save the life of Christopher. Now, in reality, it was just him trying his best to learn more about the Brood, this alien race. But either way, you do have Christopher turn into a Brood. And so for Scott, he has no choice but to go ahead and kill off his father. Now, with the death of his father, it brings more hatred between Alex and Scott. Because to Alex, he only believes that Christopher was the only thing he had left in his life that he truly cared for. That he does not care for Scott at all. But for Scott, it's kind of like, dude, our dad turned to a Brood, and it seemed like there was no other way to save his life. But for Alex, he does not care. He lost the last thing he truly cared for in this world. And the book kind of ends on that note right there. So with that being Okay, so getting back into our coverage over X-Men Age of Apocalypse, we do pick back up once again with another prelude. Now remember, the only reason why I'm calling it a prelude because it takes place before X-Men Alpha. And let me explain for the new folks who are joining our coverage over this event. You see, in the early parts of Marvel Comics working on this event, they gave us X-Men Alpha as the original starting point. And after you read that book, it then led into other books to be used to help explore this brand new reality that Marvel gave us. But then at the tail end of the event, you didn't have Marvel say, hey, you know what would be cool? If we go ahead and release a bunch of different books that kind of take place before X-Men Alpha. And so that's why I say the preludes that lead into Age of Apocalypse. And really, they did this a lot in the 1990s, like 95, 99, and even the early 2000s as well. But anyways, this story right here is another prelude that leads into Age of Apocalypse properly, or the Alpha issue. Now, just in case we do have anybody joining our coverage over this event and they're kind of wondering where in the world this storyline came from, let me go ahead and re-explain where it came from, which was Legion Quest. Now, in that storyline, you had Legion go back in time to kill off Magneto. And the reason why, because he believed that if Magneto was not around, then most likely Charles Xavier would have been able to achieve his goal. Mutants and humans being able to live together in harmony. But the problem was Magneto was around, always fighting against Charles Xavier. And so for Legion, he went back in time to kill off Magneto, but the problem was that he killed off Charles Xavier instead. And so with the death of Charles Xavier, it had brought in a brand new timeline, the Age of Apocalypse timeline. Now here's the thing, because with this brand new timeline, you had a lot of different things change for our heroes. And so our heroes are living completely different lives now in this brand new timeline. Now, for Magneto, he's really important. And the reason why, because before you had Charles die in his arms, you had Charles ask Magneto to carry on his dream. Now, here's the thing. For Magneto, at first, he did not believe in the possibility of humans and mutants being able to live together in harmony. But the whole idea of Charles, who was really dedicated to achieve that goal, he said, you know what? I now believe in your dreams, Charles Xavier. And so, yes, I will carry on your dream to hopefully bring in a world where mutants and humans can work together. The problem was that for Magneto, he realized it could be a goal that could never be achieved because humans are always scared of mutants. Humans are always going to hate on mutants. And so after that, you have Magneto say, you know what? Let me go ahead and go into hiding, but also open up a school to help young mutants learn how to control their powers and use their powers out there in the field, but to also form the X-Men as well, because he knew that sooner or later he might have to fight against the forces of Apocalypse. And really by this point for Magneto in the timeline, they had already fought against Apocalypse and his Horsemen as well. Now, with all that being said, by this point in the timeline, it's still Apocalypse just trying his best to take over North America. Now, when we dive into X-Men Alpha, by that point, he will be officially the ruler of North America completely. Now, in the other X books we're going to cover, when it comes to this event, we're going to learn how the whole idea of Apocalypse ruling North America truly does affect the rest of the world. But either way, when it comes to the X-Men at this point, their main goal is to find different ways to get rid of Apocalypse once and for all, before he has the ability to take over North America completely. And so in the opening pages of the storyline, we pick up with Magneto in Central America. And we see him fighting against two characters known as Diablo and also the Absorbing Man. Now, here's the catch, because these two characters are technically not mutants, but they're on the side of Apocalypse, because for Apocalypse, we have to remember that he's all about survival of the fittest. The strong may live, the weak may die, the strong may lead, the weak must follow. And so with all that being said, for the Absorbing Man and also Diablo, even though they're not mutants, they kind of fall in line with that kind of thought process that Apocalypse had brought into North America. And so to them, Magneto is weak, or other people around them is weak. Now, for Magneto, his main goal currently is to save Robert Kelly. Now, for Robert Kelly, he was a prisoner of war being kept in a Mayan temple down in Central America. Now, the thing is, this is Magneto trying his best to save Kelly, but to also fight against the Absorbing Man and also Diablo on his own. And honestly, it's a lot for a mutant as powerful as Magneto. But luckily, he's not alone, because you have Nightcrawler and Rogue appear. Now, with these two appearing here, they're able to help Magneto fight against Diablo and also, well, the Absorbing Man as well, but also save Kelly's life. Now, once you do have Nightcrawler and Rogue being able to help out Magneto and Kelly, you then have Nightcrawler wanting to have a one-on-one conversation with Magneto. And the reason why, because Nightcrawler got in contact with his mother, Mystique, and we kind of find out that she may have found a way to get rid of Apocalypse once and for all. And for Magneto, this is great, because now the possibility of saving the world is finally here. But now we have to jump over to Scott Summers. Now, in this reality, with Charles Xavier not being around to take in Scott Summers, to have somebody by his side, you had Scott and also Alex be adopted by Mr. Sinister. And so in this reality, Scott Summers is technically on the side of Apocalypse, because Mr. Sinister is Apocalypse's right-hand man. And so we're seeing Scott Summers watching Sunfire in this reality being tortured by machines. Now, here's the thing, because even though you have Scott on the side of Apocalypse, he hates the idea of what he is seeing. It's him believing that Apocalypse is bringing in a world of madness, a world of darkness. It's kind of Scott beginning the process of possibly breaking away from the side of Apocalypse. Now, while you have Scott watching Sunfire being tortured, he's then confronted by Maximus. Now, Maximus is also a character who's not a mutant. Matter of fact, he is an Inhuman who's part or was part of the royal family. He is the evil brother to Black Bolt. But in this reality, he had joined the side of Apocalypse. But also, he's one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse as well. Death. Now, he can tell that it's Scott Summers right now kind of hating the idea of what he's seeing at the moment, Sunfire being tortured. But it's also Scott saying like, hey, listen, I'm just here to do a transport, and that is it. So I need to see our Lord Apocalypse. But apparently Apocalypse is busy at the moment. And so it's Death saying, hey, listen, I'm taking over for our Lord. And don't worry, sooner or later, you'll be ready to transport the item. But for right now, just wait and watch Sunfire be tortured. Now, I kind of want to go ahead and jump over to the X-Men, because currently you have the X-Men staying at this underground base as underneath the old Guthrie farm. Now, the Guthrie farm belonged to the Guthrie family, and the Guthries were different characters that joined the X-Men over the years, like Cannonball or Husk, and the list goes on. But with that being said, with the whole entire farm being wrecked, you have the X-Men believe that this will be the perfect spot to hide, the underground base. Now, we do pick up with Sabretooth, who's trying to have a conversation with a character known as Blink. Now, Blink in this reality became very popular. I mean, so popular that you had Marvel try their best to give us more of Blink because how popular she was. And matter of fact, she got a miniseries 6 years after this event came out. And her miniseries does take place in the beginning and the end of this entire event. And that is why I'm going to save her miniseries until we get to the very end, because the last few pages of her miniseries does take place at the very end of this entire event. But either way, it's Sabretooth right now trying to convince her to help them fight against Apocalypse. Because of her ability, they can teleport, and they need that ability on their side. Now, you do have another character step in, and that would be Morph. Now, when it comes to Morph, Morph is the funny character on the team. He's trying his best to keep everybody happy, including Blink as well. But also, he is a shapeshifter, and that right there is going to be very important for the later parts of this story. But for Sabretooth, he kind of realized that he is unable to convince Blink to fight. He's unable to convince her to help out at this moment. But you then have Sabretooth go out of his way to rejoin the rest of the X-Men. Now, this is the rest of the X-Men trying to figure out how to go after Apocalypse, because with the information that Mystique had given Nightcrawler, they had just learned that Apocalypse is right now trying to recover. And it's very similar to the Odin Sleep, which means Apocalypse is an easy target. If they are able to find him and get rid of him, then the day is saved. Now, here's the thing, because Mystique knows where he is at. He's on the ship. Now, the ship in the old timeline is very important. And let me explain why, because the ship was created by the Celestials. It was left behind on Earth to collect data on the Earth. And once the ship had collected enough data, it was supposed to go back to the Celestials. The problem was that Apocalypse took over the ship. Now, in the old timeline, there was a point in time where you had X-Factor, the original X-Factor team, go out of their way to take over the ship. But the problem is, in this new timeline, there was no X-Factor, and so unfortunately, the ship stayed under Apocalypse control. Now, the ship is massive, and so the question is right now, why haven't anybody seen this massive ship yet? And you have Nightcrawler say, because it's not on Earth, it's on the blue side of the moon, or the blue area of the moon. And matter of fact, we jump over to the blue area of the moon where we see Cyclops currently on a ship, but also having a meeting with Death. Now, here's the thing, because with Apocalypse right now trying to recover, that means Death is in charge of the entire army of Apocalypse. But also for Cyclops, he knows that Maximus the Mad is mad enough to try to take over completely to kick Apocalypse out of his own army. But for right now, it's just Death, Maximus, trying to be a leader until his master truly does return. Now, we do learn here for Cyclops that he has to transport the Terrigen Mist. Now, the Terrigen Mist is very important. The reason why, because if you are inhuman, you may not know you are one. You may believe that you're just a regular human. But once your body is going through the Terrigen Mist, you'll then unlock your inhuman genes and your inhuman powers. And so for the Terrigen Mist, Cyclops is supposed to transport that over to where Apocalypse is at. But the thing is, we're also seeing that Maximus the Mad have been trying to use the Terrigen Mist for his own experiments as well. But now we have to jump back over to, well, Sabretooth and Blink. And technically, this is not Sabretooth. This is Morph, who's pretending to be Sabretooth while trying to have a conversation with Blink. And again, it's really more the whole idea of trying to convince her to help out, to help fight against the forces of Apocalypse, but to also use her ability to teleport them over to the base of Apocalypse. And so after a while, Morph was able to convince her, but she also knows that she did not have a conversation with Sabretooth. She had a conversation with Morph instead. But either way, she does agree to help out now. And so this kind of leads into a certain problem I had with this storyline, really this issue alone. And let me explain, because, okay, in our next video, we're going to cover X-Men Chronicles issue number 2. Now, in that storyline, we are going to establish the whole idea of Magneto and Rogue dating one another because they had feelings for one another for a very long time. And in that book, they're going to tell each other like, hey, listen, I like you and you like me. But the problem is that in this book, it seems like they're already dating. And this book takes place before that one. But on top of that, you have Rogue bring up the idea of having a son. And really, in later parts of this event, we're going to see the son of Rogue and Magneto. But either way, it's Magneto right now kind of feeling like he's not doing anything at all when it comes to fighting against Apocalypse. Like he feels like all this fighting is for nothing. They have not been able to achieve anything at all. But you have Rogue still be in his corner to kind of help push him on. Now, with all that being said, you didn't have Morph arrive saying, hey, listen, I got Blink ready to help us. So let's go ahead and attack Apocalypse now. But now we have to jump over to Cyclops. Now, when we do, it's Cyclops kind of realizing like, you know what, Apocalypse is a bad person, but Death, Maximus the Mad, is even worse than Apocalypse. So somebody got to stop Death now before he has the ability to take over the entire empire that Apocalypse had built up. Getting back over to our heroes, you do have our heroes being able to make it over to the ship by teleporting thanks to Blink. Now, once they do arrive, you have Sabretooth kind of express the whole idea of hating how Morph babies Blink. He's kind of like, listen, don't treat her like a baby. Don't treat her like a child. Treat her like an adult. And the reason why, because they're in the middle of a war right now. They can't afford the whole idea of trying to treat her like a child. Instead, get her ready for the real world, the world they currently live in with Apocalypse trying to take over. Now, for our heroes, they're then confronted by Maximus, but also different clones that he had created. Now, these clones are technically clones of different members of the royal family of the Inhumans. So, for example, there is a clone of Medusa. There is a clone of Black Bolt, and the list goes on. And so you now have all these clones fighting against our heroes. Now, by the end of this battle, every single member of our heroes, they have been officially defeated by these clones, and now they're prisoners of Maximus. Now, for Blink, she was able to get away. And the only reason why, because you had more change into her. So when it came to Maximus, he believed that he also grabbed their teleporter. But in reality, he didn't. Now, for Blink, you have her trying her best to sneak around the ship, but then she's caught by Cyclops. Now, luckily for her, Cyclops is technically on her side. He hates the idea of seeing Death in charge of the empire that Apocalypse had built up. So right now, his goal is to help her to free the X-Men, but to also stop Death. And so that kind of leads into the wild ending of this storyline. Let me explain, because, okay, you do have Scott and Blink teleport to where Death and the X-Men are currently at. And when they arrive, you have Scott go out of his way to free Sunfire, because remember, Sunfire is a prisoner of Death. And so with Sunfire being free, it's Sunfire saying, you know what? It's time for me to show you guys how powerful I truly am. And so you have Sunfire go out of his way to blow up the entire base that belongs to Death. Now, for Blink, luckily for her, she was able to teleport everyone out of there except for Maximus and all his clones. And so Maximus dies, all his clones dies as well, but also the entire base as well that belonged to Maximus. And so for the X-Men, they are now able to live for another day. And Scott Summers was also able to get away as well, thanks to Blink. But yeah, that is the ending of this storyline right here that then leads into X-Men Chronicles issue number 2, the next video. So with that being said, guys, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later. Okay, so getting back into our coverage over the Age of Apocalypse storyline, we do pick back up once again with X-Men Chronicles. Now remember, when it comes to X-Men Chronicles, it's kind of like a prelude that leads into the whole idea of Age of Apocalypse for Marvel Comics, really X-Men comics. And let me explain why I say it's more like a prelude. Because in the early parts of Marvel Comics' work on X-Men Age of Apocalypse, they gave us X-Men Alpha. Now, X-Men Alpha is really important because it was the starting off point for the whole idea of us exploring a brand new timeline. A timeline where you had Apocalypse now be the ruler of North America. Now remember, this whole idea, this brand new timeline is coming out of Legion Quest. And when it came to Legion Quest, it was really more the idea of Legion going back in time to kill off Magneto. Because to Legion, he believed that if Magneto was not around, then Charles Xavier should have been able to achieve his lifelong goal, where mutants and humans are able to live together in harmony. The problem was that when you had Legion go back in time to kill off Magneto, he had killed off Charles Xavier instead on accident. And so with the death of Charles Xavier, it had brought in a brand new timeline. And with this brand new timeline, you had Apocalypse being able to take over North America. And really, like I said earlier, it all began with X-Men Alpha. But then you had Marvel give us all these different books that kind of help us explore the whole idea of the Age of Apocalypse universe. But at the tail end of this event, you didn't have Marvel give us, well, X-Men Chronicles. Now, when it came to Chronicles, it took place before X-Men Alpha to kind of help us explore the whole idea of Magneto in this brand new timeline. How you have Magneto be the one to form the X-Men. Because remember, when it came to Charles Xavier's death, before he had died, him and Magneto had agreed to work together to have mutants and humans live together in harmony to hopefully achieve that goal. But with the death of Charles Xavier, you have Magneto try his best to carry on that dream. But unfortunately, in this reality, humans are just like they are in most realities, where they hate on the mutant race. And so with all the hatred and the fear towards the mutant race, you have Magneto say, you know what? Let me go ahead and give up for now and open up a school to allow young mutants to learn how to use their powers properly out there in the world. Now, when it came to X-Men Chronicles issue number 1, we had saw a character known as Nemesis go out of his way to, well, blow up the school of Magneto and kill off a bunch of mutants who were currently living there, including the Scarlet Witch. And so this took place right after you had Magneto and the X-Men being able to fight against Apocalypse, but also his Horsemen as well. And after you had our heroes deal with that battle, they kind of felt confident about themselves until they had came back to their school and realized their school was attacked, but the Scarlet Witch was officially dead. And so that took place 5 years ago in X-Men Chronicles issue number 1. But when we jump into X-Men Chronicles issue number 2, it's been 5 years later. And so now we're getting into the whole idea of seeing Weapon X, because in this reality, Logan is not called Wolverine, he is called Weapon X. The name Wolverine belongs to a different character that we are going to meet in this video, but right now we're seeing Weapon X and Jean Grey leaving the X-Men. And the reason why, because there was a point in the timeline where you had Magneto leave Jean Grey behind at one of the camps of Apocalypse. And the thing was, Magneto was not really trying to go back for Jean Grey for unknown reasons. But you had Weapon X, Logan, go back on his own to go save Jean Grey. Now, he did lose a hand, but he felt like he had no choice but to go ahead and save her. And so because of that, it's him saying, I'm leaving and she's coming with me. So you do have Jean Grey and also Weapon X leave. Now, while they're leaving, two things happen. First, you have Jean Grey say, Magneto, this is not your fault. You knew sooner or later this was going to happen. You need to forgive yourself because sooner or later might convince Weapon X to come back to you and rejoin the X-Men. But his second thing is you have Rogue showing that she is very concerned for Magneto. And for Gambit, it does seem like he's trying his best to get her attention, to kind of help her realize that he is madly in love with her. But now we have to jump over to a different character known as Holocaust. Now, when it comes to Holocaust, he is the son of Apocalypse. Now, we have no idea who is his mother, but we do see Holocaust right now had just wrecked an entire city on his own, but now he's being confronted by another character, and that would be Wolverine, but not the Wolverine that you were thinking of, because this Wolverine was created by Dark Beast. Now, we have not officially met Dark Beast yet in this reality, but we do know that when it came to this character, Wolverine, his genetics was tinkered by Dark Beast to make him a very powerful character. Now, for Holocaust, he tells Wolverine, I have a mission for you, and that mission is, I want you to make Magneto suffer once again. And once I know that he is suffering, then I will kill him. Now, Holocaust is actually Nemesis from our last video who had killed off the Scarlet Witch. So something happened from that point at this point to turn Nemesis into Holocaust. But either way, it's him telling Wolverine, I need you to kill off Magneto's son. And once you have done that to make him suffer, then I will kill off Magneto. And so now we pick up a few days later, and we pick up with Magneto with the X-Men heading over to Denver, Colorado. Here's the reason why, because their main goal is to find a group of bandits to go ahead and get rid of them for causing trouble in this area. Now, you do have our heroes being able to find these bandits, but once they do, it's the book kind of now giving us the opportunity to look at almost every single member of the X-Men team that Magneto had put together. But you then have Wolverine appear. Now, when he does appear, he's hiding behind the scenes. And matter of fact, he does walk up on two of the bandits. Now, we learn here that for Wolverine, he has the ability to charge up other people with some type of energy to make them go berserk. And so you have Wolverine walk up on those two bandits, charge them up, and they go berserk to attack Magneto. Now, one of those bandits does have a knife that's not made out of metal, and so that knife cannot be stopped by Magneto nor by Rogue, because remember, in this reality, Rogue, she did not absorb the powers of Miss Marvel. Instead, she had absorbed the powers of Polaris in this reality. And so either way, when it comes to Rogue, she sees the knife going towards Magneto. Now remember, she is very concerned for Magneto. This kind of builds the whole idea of the possibility of those two characters getting together. Now, once you have Magneto get stabbed by that knife, you have Gambit say, hey, listen, you know what? I am second in charge. It's time for us to go ahead and do a hard retreat so that Magneto is able to recover. And so once you have the X-Men go back to their base, you really do have Magneto express the idea that he does not love that Gambit had called a retreat, that the X-Men should have gone on without him to take down those bandits, because sooner or later, Magneto could possibly die. And if he does, the X-Men need to understand to keep going on without him if he does die. Now, for Gambit, he's kind of like, dude, listen, we need you in our corner if we are going to have the chance to stop Apocalypse. Now, for Gambit, when he walks away, before he walks away, he does try his best to get the attention of Rogue. Now, they're not dating yet, but it's him saying like, listen, I have feelings for you, and I'm going to show you I do by doing all these different things. But the problem is that you have Rogue ignore Gambit, because her main concern right now is Magneto. And she tells him like, hey, listen, let's talk later. Like, I want to sit here and talk to Magneto a tad bit more in a one-on-one conversation. But back in Denver, we do pick back up with Wolverine once again, and you have Wolverine being able to recruit a bunch of different people to follow him when it comes to heading over to the base of the X-Men to possibly kill off, well, Quicksilver. But now I kind of want to jump back over to Gambit, because you have Gambit right now talking to Bobby Drake Iceman. And the reason why, because it's really more of Gambit trying his best to figure out how to tell Rogue how he truly feels about her. The whole idea that he does love her. And so it's really sweet here to see how much Gambit cares for this woman. Like, he is actually thinking about settling down with her. But the problem is that Gambit does not really realize that he is technically second fiddle when it comes to Magneto. And matter of fact, when we jump over to Rogue and Magneto, they're having this conversation where it's really more Magneto telling Rogue who inspired him to be the man he is today. The whole idea of Charles Xavier being that man who inspired Magneto to be a hero, to be a person, to fight for the mutant race, to stop evil mutants like Apocalypse, but to also try to achieve a goal that might not ever be achieved. But with all that being said, it's also now Magneto kind of thinking that he's a failure. And that right there is really important, because he truly does believe that he is a failure, that the X-Men is a failed concept. But for Rogue, it's her saying like, no, it's not. And no matter what, we are going to be by your side to the very end. Now, we do get another page. We do see Wolverine getting closer and closer to finding the base of the X-Men to, hopefully do his mission that Holocaust had put him on. But then you have Rogue go over to where Quicksilver is at. Now, really, this is more Rogue kind of wondering, like, does Quicksilver still miss Wanda, the Scarlet Witch? Because she died back in X-Men Chronicles issue number 1, which took place 5 years ago in this timeline. But she also died in front of Rogue. And so is Rogue kind of wondering like, hey, Quicksilver, do you still miss your sister? But at the same time, you have her asking like, do you think she will love the idea of me being second in command of the X-Men? And you have Quicksilver say yes to both. But when it comes to his second question, it's him saying like, the X-Men is going to expand sooner or later. And when it does, it's going to need multiple leaders to lead all of these different teams when it comes to fighting against the forces of Apocalypse. And so right after he says that to her, you then have Gambit walk into the room. Now again, this is Gambit trying his best to express his love to Rogue, but you have Rogue just walk away. And the reason why, because she's heading right over to Magneto once again. And so you have Gambit ask Quicksilver, like, what can he do when it comes to Rogue? Like, what is wrong with her? And you have Quicksilver say, you should talk to my father. But hey, mind you, my father is currently training at the moment. And of course, this is a problem because Magneto should be resting right now after being injured in the last battle. But for Magneto, there's no time to rest. He must always be prepared. Now for Gambit, he does try his best to jump into the middle of the training session, but you have Magneto saying, dude, listen, if you want to talk to me after, but if you're going to jump into the middle of this session, you're going to also join the training session as well. Now, outside the base of the X-Men, we do pick up with, well, Wolverine and his forces. Now, they're waiting for the right moment to attack, but the problem is that, again, when it comes to Wolverine, he has the ability, to charge up other people with some type of energy to make them go berserk. And so, you have one of the guys wanting to go ahead and rush in to attack the X-Men to kill off, well, Magneto for Holocaust. But you do have Wolverine grab that guy, snap that guy's neck and say, we are not going to attack right now. We need to wait for the right moment to actually attack. So the rest of you guys better stay right here and listen to my plan very carefully. But when we jump back over to Gambit and also Magneto, the training session is done. It's now time for Gambit to have the ability to talk to Magneto about Rogue. But the problem is, like, for Magneto, he does not know how to tell Gambit how he feels about Rogue as well. But the thing is, while you have the two guys talking to one another, Rogue does reappear once again. Now, when she does reappear once again, she does ask to have a one-on-one conversation with Magneto. And so you do have Gambit leave. But the man is still hoping to have that conversation with Rogue about the idea of him loving her. And so this kind of goes back into the whole idea of Rogue not really being able to touch other people because, again, her ability to take their powers away with skin-to-skin contact. But it's Magneto saying, you have the powers of Polaris, so let me show you the powers of Polaris that could actually help you to touch and hug and kiss other people. Like, for example, putting a biomagnetic shield around you, which will allow you to actually touch other people. And so you have Magneto do that and being able to touch her arm, her hand, her face, and kind of shows that the two characters are kind of in love with one another. But while they're touching each other, Gambit is there. He's watching everything, and he realized that he lost the woman he loved so much to supposedly his close friend, his best friend, Magneto. And so you do have Gambit express his anger of the whole idea of not being able to kiss Rogue, to be with Rogue, to see Magneto be that person with Rogue. Now, Magneto and Rogue did not really kiss here, but again, the way they were touching, it kind of shows like, hey, these two characters are in love with one another. And so you do have Gambit express his anger of the whole idea of what happened between them. But then the alarms goes off because, well, Wolverine and his forces are attacking. And so you do have Rogue and Magneto leave. But right after leaving, for Gambit, it's more of sooner or later Rogue is going to have to pick Magneto or him. And when Rogue and Magneto arrive to help out the rest of the X-Men to fight against the forces of Wolverine, you have the rest of the X-Men tell Magneto and Rogue there's no need for help because technically these guys are just regular humans who have just gone berserk. And that's really it. So for Magneto, it's a perfect time to talk, but they can't. And the reason why, because of Wolverine. He comes behind Magneto and slashes him right in the back. Now again, for Wolverine, his main goal is to not kill off Magneto. His main goal is to kill off Quicksilver, to make Magneto suffer. But then he realized that, you know what? Magneto is in love with Rogue. So why not kill off Rogue to make him suffer in a different type of way? Now you do have Gambit try his best to jump into the battle, but unfortunately for Gambit, he's not that strong to fight against, well, Wolverine. And so you then have Magneto try to also rejoin the battle as well. And the rest of the book does kind of end on a quick note here because, okay, you do have the rest of the X-Men show up to fight against Wolverine. The problem is that they're not strong enough to fight against Wolverine. So it's a one-man army being able to take down the rest of the X-Men on his own. Now, for Wolverine, he does tell Rogue that, hey, I'm not going to kill off Magneto, but I am going to kill you off to make the man suffer. Now, luckily for Rogue and also Magneto, you do have Gambit being able to sneak up on Wolverine, to use his powers to charge up the belt on Wolverine's body. And so once he does that, you then have Gambit being able to push Wolverine off the cliff, and that belt does explode, and we're kind of left to believe that Wolverine is officially dead. And matter of fact, he is, because we don't see him ever again in the rest of Age of Apocalypse. But right after you have our heroes win, you have Gambit realize that he can't stay here anymore. He can't be part of the X-Men because he now knows that Rogue is in love with Magneto. And so this is Gambit leaving the X-Men and leads into the rest of Age of Apocalypse.